First, go up here. Hi, everybody. We'll give it just a moment to allow some more folks to join, and then we'll get started. I'm just watching the numbers go up right now. Hi, everybody. If you're just joining, we're just giving it a moment to allow some more folks to join, and then we'll get things kicked off. Okay, so it's one after. Let's go ahead and get things started. So hi, everybody. Welcome to today's GC Advantage webinar, PE Portfolio Company General Counsel Roundtable, Career Challenges and Opportunities. I'm Brittany McDonough. I'm a partner at Barker Gilmore. I'll be moderating today's discussion, and I'm thrilled to be joined by three fantastic panelists. We have Logan Anderson, the General Counsel at Renewity, Michael Shafir, CLO at Full Bloom, and Megan Byer, partner at Wilson Sonsini. So thank you so much to the three of you for being here, and very much looking forward to discussing this space and sharing your insights with everybody today. For those of you who are new here, just a little bit about Barker Gilmore. We're an executive search firm. We specialize in helping clients build, develop, and optimize legal and compliance departments. So this includes recruiting, anywhere from senior counsel all the way up to GCs and chief legal officers, as well as chief compliance officers. In addition to executive search, we also offer coaching, mentoring, and advisory services. These are led by former GCs and CCOs who have actually sat in the seat and bring firsthand knowledge as far as what it takes to succeed. So today's session is part of our GC Advantage program. This is a professional development platform designed specifically for corporate legal and compliance leaders. We host these webinars on a monthly basis, and we typically feature, sitting GCs, law firm partners, C-level execs, board members, executive recruiters, all with the goal of helping to bring you insights to ultimately advance your career. Just a quick note, today's session is being recorded, so we'll send an email out to all registrants once the recording and podcast version are available on our website. That typically takes about 2 weeks. We will reserve about 10 minutes at the end to do audience Q&A. So throughout the discussion today, you can use the Q&A icon within Zoom and submit questions. You can also click the thumbs up icon to upvote questions submitted by others, and then we'll do our best to get through as many of those as we can at the end. But before we dive into the conversation, let's just have each of the panelists quickly introduce themselves. So Logan, Michael, Megan, I'll turn it over to you to just do brief intros.
Great, thanks. I'll go first. Logan Anderson, I'm the General Counsel of Renewity Home based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm new in the role here, but I have 6 years as GC experience in private equity portfolio companies. I was recently with a portco in Houston, Texas. Our friends at Barker Gilmore recruited me to move to Charlotte to take this position. But I'm really happy to be here talking about the GC space. It's something I'm really passionate about, particularly in the PE portco arena. So thanks for having me.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Shafir. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Full Bloom, which is an education and mental health company based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I actually sit in South Florida. I was lucky enough to get recruited by Brittany and her team for a fully remote role. I've been practicing for 22 years, and 13 of those have been as a GC or CLO. Majority at private equity portfolio companies. So very excited for the conversation today, and hope to have a lively one.
Hey everyone, it's Megan Byer. I'm a corporate and securities partner at Wilson Sonsini in our New York office. I've been practicing for about 20 years. It's actually my third law firm, first two Skadden and Ropes, And so have quite a bit of experience in working with private equity and venture-backed companies. My practice largely focuses on, as early as a founder and idea all the way through to taking companies public and working with companies in the public space. So was excited to be invited to join today.
Right. Thank you all. So how we're thinking about kind of structuring today's discussion is to walk through all phases of the Portco GC career path. So kind of starting with, all right, I'm thinking about, or I've been approached with a Portco GC opportunity. What do I need to know? What do I need to vet? To now I'm in the seat. What's it like? What does it take to excel? And then to the inevitable, post-exit period and the career trajectory thereafter. So let's start with, all right, I'm considering a Portco GC career. It's not the most traditional in-house path, being in this investor-backed environment. Like, the learning curve can be steep, the resources are lean, and the stakes can feel incredibly high. But it can be incredibly dynamic and rewarding, as I think you folks can attest to. Like, what type of temperament, personality, or life circumstances would you say are best suited for the role?
Yeah, so I'm happy to start. So I actually thrive in this environment, and I have a few reasons why I think it suits my personality well. So I am a risk taker. That's my personal temperament. I like to take calculated risks about in my personal life and in my professional life, and because I'm banking on myself being successful. So I feel very confident that if I'm put to a challenge to in a GC role at a Portco, specifically, I am up to the challenge of meeting the performance expectations of the role. I also think it's really critical to be able to navigate the many different dynamics that can come up in a Portco. I'm not saying that the resources are constrained as in you're doing it alone, but there's certainly a hyper focus on financial performance because the private equity owners are always looking to how do they build a business that they will then sell and realize certain gains on. So obviously costs are a big piece of that. So you have to have the mindset that you want to do the best job you can, you want to be successful, but you also have to be ready to roll up your sleeves and do some of the work yourself. It is not, in my experience, it's not an environment where you're managing a lot of external counsel and just driving strategy. You're driving strategy, but you're also, where you can, taking that and internalizing some of that work for your in-house legal team or yourself personally. That suits my personality really well. I love to be in the weeds, get into the details, and where I can kind of self-manage some of the legal work.
Yeah, I would add on to that I think a good quality to have is a healthy degree of self-confidence, and confidence that you know what you're doing, because a lot of people across the organization are going to be looking to you for definitive answers. And I think it doesn't serve anyone, yourself, the organization, or your peers, to sort of be wishy-washy at any point in a private equity GC role, because things move really, really fast. And so I think you need to have a good degree of confidence about the business, and the different areas of law that you're asked to consult on. And I would say an ability to roll with the punches is really critical in one of these roles, because this is my fourth GC role. Three of them have been at portfolio companies. And I cannot recall one day that was anything like any other day in any of these roles. Things are changing all the time. To fast-paced environment. It's really exciting. I think, a lot of times you're dealing with challenges that you had never expected, or issues that had never come up before. But you just got to be ready to, I think, roll with the punches, as I said, and keep calm in the face of multiple competing priorities.
Yeah, I would dovetail on that and say a trait that I think is quite critical, that people don't talk about enough for lawyers broadly, is just high empathy and high awareness. So the dynamics that are involved in a private equity backed company, I think, are different than, founder led or venture backed company, which is that you have obviously the private equity fund sitting up top, and then you potentially could have diverging interests or ideas sitting at the management team level, and then managing if you're the head of people. I think that always is an interesting dynamic too. It's like the most the role that I feel like when asking GCs that they would most like to shed is almost always people. I don't know if people would agree with that on this call, but and so being aware of all those competing dynamics and then being able to navigate them with confidence and with, clarity, I think is are, those folks tend to, I think, be the most successful from our vantage point in those roles, because they're able to see when things pop up and then navigate those various dynamics. So like we talk about that a lot, even as a law firm, is, high empathy for, understanding the dynamics. Like you can have five of the same exact issue that you have to present to different clients, and you're going to present it in five different ways. And even I'm sure for the GCs in this call, you have the same issue and you're going to present it differently to different people on the management team, the private equity fund, the employees. And so that dynamic, I think, really gets heightened in this environment.
I think
Yeah, sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Michael.
Sorry. We knew that was going to happen. I think that's really true. And I would just add, I think that being able to communicate at all different levels of the organization, I think the first thing that a Portco GC needs to do is really dive in and immerse themselves in the business, and understand not just the business that they're in, but the business that every different constituency in the company thinks that they're in, so that you can meet people where they are, and when decisions have to be made, explain them in a way that makes sense, to every level of the business.
Yeah, and I wanted to further emphasize something you said, Michael, about fast-paced environment. I don't know that there's a single day I've showed up in my years as Portco GC where the day occurred how I expected it to. Several of the days, nothing that I expected to do got accomplished because all kinds of new issues come up. It's just a really fast-paced environment. There's financial targets that the investors want to meet, and you have a management team that's all working towards meeting those. And so the issue that comes up today was not even on your radar when you showed up to the office that morning.
How do you balance that, right? Like something I hear from my PE clients is, we need somebody who is hands-on and can roll up their sleeves. But obviously, you're also a fully contributing member of the executive team. Like you've got to help steer the strategic direction. So like when you're leanly staffed, like sometimes, these Portco GCs, you're a team of one. I think both of you have a couple lawyers beneath you in your roles today. But like how do you like balance the tactical day-to-day, like being in the weeds, while still making sure that you're driving value and like actually making a strategic impact? And are you really reliant on like outside counsel more than perhaps you would be in other settings? But I'm just like curious what that balancing act looks like.
Yeah, so I'm happy to start on this one too. So yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure. My number one priority is to always be in lockstep with my CEO. So understanding, okay, here are the issues that are coming up. Here are the long-term projects, strategic projects that we have. Here are the day-to-day issues, and what's in the best interest of the business and the balancing of those different priorities. And then also, as you kind of see the workload start to build up, and you realize you're maybe putting off some of the day-to-day issues when you're focused on strategic items, is just having a really good Rolodex of external firms that you can rely on, that you teach the business to, so they can step in and take over if and when you need some daily coverage for the routine issues that pop up.
I think that's right. I think another thing that you can do, I've been a team of one a couple of times, and also in both of those organizations, the first person to sit in the chair at all, the first legal hire in the company. And I think in addition to leveraging external, outside counsel resources and the like, I think it's an opportunity to leverage internal resources too, and to really sort of embed yourself with the operators of the business, and in partnering with them to solve problems and to get things done. And you really can't be above anything. If you got to make copies, make copies. But I think partnering with internal business folks to help sort of move matters along serves the dual purpose of A, getting those things off of your desk, and B, establishing the relationships internally that you need to establish and the trust that you need from those internal operations folks, so that issues get bubbled up to you as a GC quicker, earlier. As any GC will tell you, the later we find out about something, the worse it's going to be. But I think it's a challenge to be leanly staffed, but it's also an opportunity to really get yourself nestled into the business, and establish those trust relationships.
I would be super interested too to hear if we have two different approaches, I think, when we're working with private equity backed companies. One is that the legal team, the external counsel is, effectively named by the private equity fund. So the private equity fund selects the counsel for you, and you're told, hey, you're using this external counsel, which is probably the private equity fund's external counsel. And the other way that it works, right, is that management is given the ability to select their own counsel, which sometimes I think is viewed, not a value judgment, it just happens both ways. Sometimes there's an extra layer of counsels involved. And that obviously creates different dynamics as well, just in terms of, the communication flows and who the responsibilities and who the obligations flow to. So I'd be super interested, which I think some people kind of forget when they go into private equity companies. I find that they don't necessarily think about that in advance. They think they may get to select, and then maybe that's not the case. And just curious to hear about your experiences with that, whether you use your private equity funds counsel, you have separate counsel, and kind of how that came about.
Done both.
Yeah.
And within one portco, I've done both. I think it really is dependent on the type of matter that it is, and the level of which the PE firm wants to be involved. If it involves equity or they're certainly going to be interested. For day-to-day matters, I've been fortunate with all the PE firms that I've worked with that we can select our own counsel for the most part. But as it becomes more critical or sort of what one might refer to as bet the company litigation or matters, I think they certainly get more involved. There is an inherent conflict there, I think. The law firms who are the PE firms, law firms, are certainly not unaware of the fact that they are the PE firms, law firms, and certainly act accordingly. I'm not suggesting any, sort of impropriety or anything like that, but it is a dynamic that sort of hangs over the attorney-client relationship, and both sides need to be aware of it and sort of navigate around it cautiously.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Michael said. One of the dynamics that you have to remain conscious of is that there are the organizational level documents, like the financing documents, the equity documents. Those existed well before and they're managed at the level of the PE sponsors. Now they may have day-to-day impacts, and so the role of the GC is to understand those issues, but understand that there is a PE law firm relationship that kind of manages the documentation, and that I'm involved in the kind of issues related to those that affect the day-to-day operations. That's how I see my role. And then I've been very fortunate that the day-to-day legal issues that come up in just running the business, I've had the ability to select my own counsel, and there have been occasions where the PE folks have either expressed their interest in having someone or want to vet the firms that we're using. And so it's just making sure you have the right resources that meet their expectations. And once you kind of build that relationship with your PE sponsors, or stop asking about it at all because they know it's taken care of. So it's about building that relationship as you advance in that role as well.
Yeah. So kind of going back a step too, when you're considering a portco GC role, whether you've been in the space before or not, and it's different, right, than perhaps the vetting and assessing process of a more traditional in-house counsel role where, okay, I'm looking at the leadership team, in the company that I'm joining, but now not only are you vetting the company you're joining, but also the PE sponsor behind that. So I'm curious, and especially Logan and Michael, since you've been through this a number of times, like what are you looking for in a good PE sponsor versus a bad PE sponsor? Like, what kind of questions are you asking? And I mean, in most instances, right, you're meeting with folks at the sponsor level throughout the interview process, but what else is important to you as far as, like, I guess just determining whether this is going to be a good fit and, a financially smart move when you're vetting the sponsor itself?
Yeah, sure. So when you're looking at a PE portfolio company role, you're not just looking at what does the role entail and what do I need to do to be successful. You're also in essentially putting your career in the hands of the business being successful, which in turn is the PE sponsors, or do they have a good track record of building and selling businesses for a profit? I mean, I think we get more into the compensation side, the
Yeah.
typical compensation side later. But you are invested as much in the business and the PE sponsors as you are in the here's the role and the definition of what I need to do in the organization to help the organization move forward. You can vet the PE sponsors. I would certainly, you could do quick Google searches on any of the well-respected PE firms. You can see what their funding raising has been. Are they having a lot of success in raising additional funds for new businesses, or are they seeing a downturn? I mean, if they're seeing a slowdown in their funding, that would mean that their investors haven't been as happy, or there's market conditions driving that, but haven't been as happy of the performance of their portfolio companies, which may or may not be PE related. And then you can also just generally through interviews with them get a good feel of what's their level of involvement, what's their expertise in this particular space, and how do they feel about the investment of the business. I've also asked for the investment thesis documents. So you're looking at why do they think this is going to be a successful business? And you can understand what research they did on the industry, on the business, on the management team to internally the business, and understand, okay, do you think that that's a well reasoned investment thesis, and is that something I'm ready to get behind?
Yeah, I would also say that I think there's a sort of an intangible component to it too. You're going to meet members of the leadership team, and you're going to meet folks at the PE sponsor. And I think if they are aligned in how they're talking about the company and how the sort of the vocabulary that they're using, and the sentiments that they're expressing about what they see as their investment window and their horizon for exit, and how they view sort of the industry that the company is in as a whole. I would be, I think, listening for sort of real alignment on a lot of those questions. I've unfortunately been in roles where I think the PE sponsor and the leadership team were thinking differently about where the company was going, and what the plans were for the company, and that was really reflected, unfortunately, not in the interview process, but it was reflected in practice, and I think it was detrimental, I think, to the company ultimately, because not everybody was on the same page. I also think that it's important to ask when you're talking to the leadership team about the level of involvement that the PE sponsor has in sort of running the day-to-day, or commenting at least on the day-to-day operations of the business. The answer will be what it will, but I think it's important to be prepared. I've been in companies where the PE investors are more passive, and others where they're on the phone with the leadership team multiple times a week. There's no right or wrong model, but it's important to be prepared, and to know what you're walking into.
And the
Yeah.
only other item that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, this is okay. I was just gonna say we had A general counsel contact that was going into a private equity backed company, we recommended that she talk to other, companies in the portfolio to just understand how the private equity fund operated. And, she got feedback in the process that was largely, hey, don't expect to be able to be involved with this series of things, structuring, equity. You're not going to be able to put your stamp on those things. You're coming from a venture-backed dynamic. It's going to look completely different. It's going to include profits, interests, and phantom equity and all kinds of things that don't really come up for us very much in venture, but for private equity is really standard stuff. And you'll probably be running largely the execution of the business. They're going to stay out of the business, but you're not going to touch any of those things. I think she thought she could change it and had a conversation with the CEO, who was telling her, "Hey, no, we're gonna run this like a venture company. It's gonna look totally different. We're gonna have options and the things that you would normally see." And she got in the mix and was wildly disappointed when she found out it was exactly what she heard from the other GCs at private equity backed companies in the portco, the portcos. So I do think that just like you can be caught in an echo chamber too with the management team. This and as will, they want to believe it too. And so almost as the cross check, that portfolio company, it's in addition to the vertical check, the horizontal check across the portcos can sometimes be helpful just to make sure you're getting consistent feedback across as well.
Yeah, I don't know that it's not the direct point, but I think also that is such a valuable resource once you're in a
Mhm.
portfolio company. The best PE firms that I've worked with make sure that there's sort of opportunities for GCs across their portfolio companies to connect regularly, whether it's to talk about issues that are popping up in the broader legal space or in specific industries. And that I've found that to be really a godsend, like that community of other GCs who are in the same position that you are in with the same sponsor. I think there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of sort of practical advice to be gained in those settings.
So I've heard each of you talk about, through vetting, like, or you're looking for kind of alignment, or you're hearing the organization and the goals described similarly by members of the leadership team within the Portco, and then those leaders within the um, within the fund or the sponsor. But I want to hear about situations where there's been a lack of alignment. And do you have any examples you can share where maybe the direction that you're being given or from the sponsor is different than the CEO, or there's kind of competing priorities? And how do you navigate them? And like, where does your allegiance lie? Do you always have to listen to the CEO? Like, I think the idea of this PE sponsor as a stakeholder that isn't present in other settings is really fascinating. And like, how do they factor in, and like, where in the chain of command, I guess, do they fall? But would love to hear, if to the extent you can share without breaching confidentiality, like any actual examples when you've navigated that.
Yeah, so I'm happy to start on this one. You have to keep both of them happy. That's the ultimate answer. Is you need your CEO to be happy and the private equity team to be happy as well, the partners of the private equity firm. And the way I've always navigated that is you kind of get a feel for when there's going to be a conflict, or kind of the priorities of the two. And when you start approaching a conflict, or you start realizing that there's going to be differing opinions on how to handle a certain situation, I'm very direct and open with my CEO that I would never kind of share anything with the private equity group that I wouldn't share with him. And before I share anything with him, he will know beforehand. He or she will know beforehand. And that gives them the opportunity to kind of, let's work together on the messaging. Let's work together on the strategy. Let's make sure it's presented in a way that, I agree that is the proper representation of the issue, but also tackle it together. And I've fully committed to any CEO I've worked for that they will never hear anything from the PE sponsor that they hadn't heard from me. So as long as you have that open line of communication and you are able to be very transparent on both ends, I think that is the way you navigate that. certainly we've had some litigation or risk issues. I can't go necessarily in the details, but significant litigation issues that rise to the level that the PE sponsor needs to know and needs to be involved in some of the strategy associated, or they want to be. And the way you do that is, and the way I've always done it is, the CEO's like, it's not material. We don't need to really get them. They're going to get all worked up over it. It's not a big deal. Is you prepare the kind of overview of the litigation, the facts of the case, in a way to not only say, hey, here's the exposure, but here are all the things we're doing to mitigate that exposure to get it at a manageable level, so that you can get ahead of the kind of conflict that could occur between the two. It comes up occasionally, not very often. I mean, I've been fortunate to be in well-aligned organizations between the PE sponsors and the CEOs, but it's just making sure your messaging is in sync with how the CEO agrees to message it, while still making sure they get the legal issues covered.
I think that's right. I think that I've always followed sort of my CEO's lead in terms of how I go about crafting my interactions with the PE folks, who are also generally members of the board, just like the CEO is. So that's sort of how I keep it in my head too, that I'm answering to different board members, which is my job. And ultimately my client is the company. And so, I need to be acting in the best interest of the company. And I think that the law degree gives you a little bit of body armor with that, in terms of, this is my professional opinion and this is why I feel this way and this is why I think this way. But I think it's important to stay aligned with your CEO, because that's who you're working with on a day-to-day basis. And you need that trust, and that communication. But I think it's also really critical to be transparent as possible with the PE sponsors. It is just a matter of following, I think, the CEO's lead in terms of the manner in which you communicate with the PE firm, so that at least the executive leadership team is sort of speaking with one voice. Because I think that goes a long way in communications with the PE firm, that there's, alignment within the leadership team at the company, and that includes the GC. And so Logan is correct. I mean, there are ways that you present. We talked about this earlier. There are ways that you present the same issue to different audiences, your PE sponsor is just another one of those audiences. So you need to as you develop that relationship, you learn how to communicate effectively with folks at all levels of the organization, including the board.
So we hear this term value creation in private equity, right? And like, how can the GC in a portco company create value? Like, and how do you get around like legal really being more of a cost center than a profit center, but you're expected to create value? And like, how do you do that? Like, how do you drive profit as in a portco as a general counsel?
I'll start on this one. I have a stock answer to this question, actually, that I use in interviews and when I'm meeting folks at a new company, which is that the value that the legal department provides is in being of service. We are of service to the business, and to all of the folks who do keep the trains running and who do ensure that the company is profitable and well run. And the way that I always characterize us doing that is by making it easier for people in the business to do their jobs. I think that a good or great GC is someone who is in the business of removing roadblocks to the business, and finding ways around obstacles in order to allow the business to do what it does well. And I think that's how we create value. Also, we negotiate insurance rates. But other than that, I think really being of service and being available to serve the other aspects of the business is the most important way that we can not just create value, but help those aspects of the business drive profitability.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what Michael said and then add a couple of points. I mean, I was very fortunate early in my career to be the GC of a company that preached and lived the servant leadership model, as in the back office function is there to serve the folks out in the field that are doing the work that generates revenue. And so it was every day, it was to solve problems for them so they could focus on the actual revenue driving activities and not the back office function. And I live by that today. The other item that I found that where GCs or the legal function can add a lot of value to the business and actually drive, I guess it's more of reducing costs, but when you're working on strategic items in the organization, having a very good understanding of the finance and accounting aspects of those items so that you can, for example, one that I've used a couple of times now is vacation and PTO policies. There's several ways to write compliant vacation and PTO policies across the 50 states, but there may be some that have a larger financial benefit to the organization if they're structured in a way that you're not paying huge sums of money when somebody leaves the position because they have this huge accrued bank of vacation. It's a war story that, you know, if you're managing an organization of any size, several thousand folks, can have a 6 to 7 figure impact. And if you're just asked to write a compliant vacation policy, that you solve the problem and we move forward. But if you're focused on what are the financial impacts of the various options, you may have no impact on the folks out in the field and their vacation availability, but you can see real revenue or real cost reductions on the finance side. And if you have to keep those in mind in any kind of PE-backed business, because that's honestly what the biggest driver of success of the business over the whole period.
I think too, when we think value creation, at least on our end, because we are 100% a cost center as an external law firm, but we do often get involved at some of the most critical times for our clients, right? I mean, it's a sale of the company, it's litigation, it's a financing round, it's a take private, it's a go public. And so, you know, when we're really getting involved, the goal for us is, you know, we never say no. We're like, how can we get you to yes? And even that simple, I know everyone says that, but even that simple, you know, approach to, I'm not here to tell you no. I'm here to get you as close as possible to the business objectives that you're trying to achieve, in a way, you know, that we can do so that makes sense for the business. And so for us, I think it's the creation really comes in there's really, really key critical moments in being a true business partner to get to a desired outcome. So in terms of the front end, which is, oh, I just view legal as a cost center. And listen, I mean, we've probably all, everyone on this phone call dealt with a colleague or a leader that thought, you know, hey, I don't really need legal. Legal just gets in my way. And trying to change that person's mind or trying to provide value in the critical moments, I think, you know, that really is the thing that we are attempting to do over time. You may not be able to change that person's mind, but yeah, at some point, at least for, I would say a fair number of people that have operated in that way, they have an aha moment where they're like, oh shit, like I get it. I get why I'm using legal. If they've done this for long enough, it's hard to hold that view over the entirety of a career. I think you'll have an experience at least once in your career where you're like, oh man, the lawyers really saved me. And so like those moments, I think is kind of what we all live for and strive for, to get to the like, oh, I'm being viewed as a real team member, contributor, strategic advisor and benefit to the business and not just a cost center. So I think we're all working for it all the time, I guess is a short way to say that.
Yeah, and internally, I think there's an opportunity when you sit in the GC chair to be a real connector for the business. There are always going to be areas of the business that traditionally may not talk to each other that much. But if you are, as a GC, if you're talking to everyone, you really have the opportunity to have your finger on the pulse of the business. And when someone comes knocking on your door with a question or a problem, you can sort of connect it to things that are going on in a larger organization, and try and I think that's a real value add as well, is to sort of think of problems or issues or opportunities in a more holistic way, that not a lot of people in a lot of roles have the opportunity or ability to do.
Okay, so I want to make sure we reserve some time at the end for audience Q&A. There's two more things that I want to touch on before we move to Q&A. One is Portco compensation, which I think we could spend an entire session discussing and dissecting. But I know that's definitely of interest to the audience. Like, what are the things that you, I guess, need to understand when it comes to this compensation structure and model? And I mean, I think I'm namely referring to the equity and the upside potential. And like, when you're presented with an offer, what questions do you need to ask? What do you need to see? Like, how do you really come to understand what the potential value is? And is that value based on today's valuation? Is it based on when they anticipate the exit? Like, let's talk through that.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start. So I've been through my prior company I was with. I joined as to launch the legal department. I went through a complete hold period, hit a recapitalization, and had new PE sponsors after that. And then, as I mentioned, recently moved to Renuity. So I've seen this at 3 stages, and they're pretty similar. And it's actually really not very complicated. The PE folks say, hey, I'm investing X dollars into this business. Here's the return I need to generate to have a successful transaction for my investors. And if we meet this level on our original investment, there's a formulaic way in which they calculate, okay, whatever your options. It's a really basic way to describe profit interest or equity options. But it is aligning your compensation at the exit directly with the PE owners. And if they meet their targets or their metrics, then you have this scaled compensation package. But it is a significant portion of the comp package you're offered at an executive team member or the general counsel. And so understanding, okay, what is the hold period that they are expecting to reach that target? What is the plan to get there? Understanding the likelihood of that being successful. And then, it goes back to the screening the private equity owners. What has been their track record historically on reaching that financial metric? The typical is they're shooting for at least 3 times return in 5 years. I mean, that's the normal at least investment horizon I've seen in the middle market space. And then you're tied directly to their performance. And then there's the standard comp package of just a fair salary, bonus structure that's usually tied to the organization as well.
Yeah, I think that with respect to the equity piece, I think Logan explained it really well, and it's not complicated in terms of, it winds up being a simple math equation, but the significant part to make a decision about is the risk. And it's always going to be a risk decision. And I think Logan said this in our sort of pre-call, but I think you have to think of it at least in part as an investment. And investments have no guarantee of success. And I think you just need to adjust your expectations and prepare accordingly. It can certainly be, a very rewarding method of compensation. But there's also, of course, inherent risk in jumping into the private equity boat.
All right. So last thing I want to talk about before we move to Q&A is the inevitable exit, right? So it's built into the PE model. So what happens next? Like, and both of you have gone through this exit. Do most GCs stay in the Portco world post-exit? Like, what are the chances you're out of a job post-exit? Like, talk to us about this, because I mean that's the risky part. I've interviewed GC candidates for these roles who are just spooked by the prospect of why would I want to take something with the potential of being out of a job in 3 years. You've both done it successfully, so let's hear about that.
I've been fortunate to stay with my organizations when they have gone through exits or transactions of that kind. And I think it really is dependent on what the posture of the company is at that point. I think the organizations that I was a part of made during those transactions and those processes and the various dog and pony shows that were getting put on, I think made a point of selling not just the company but the leadership of the company to potential new investors. And if your company takes that tack, then I think the new folks are investing in the existing leadership team. So I've been very lucky in my career to be part of exits that were presented and sold that way. So it's just dumb luck, I guess. Kind of how I got this
Yeah,
career.
similar, Michael, from my side, I've been very fortunate to be involved in companies that have had successful exits. And it's very much presented as here's the company and here's the performance of the company and here's the management team that got the company to that point. And I believe that if you take some of the businesses I've worked for and you wiped out the upper management and then tried to sell the business, it would not. I don't think it would turn out well. So I don't. If you're with a successful company and a successful management team, I don't think the risk is very high of having to look for another job on exit. There are certainly things that could change the dynamic of the legal function quite a bit in those exits if you're sold to a strategic partner that already has a huge legal department, or if maybe the next step is to go public and you're not somebody who has that public entity experience. There might be a person better suited for that. But I don't see either of those as just a day one elimination. We'll figure it out later. It's that there would be a long transition in time. You just went to a successful exit, so you have hopefully you were well rewarded in that, and so you have time to figure out the plan. But again, it's not something that I spend a whole lot of time worrying about, as long as you invest the time and understand that the trajectory of the business to confirm that you feel comfortable that you're on the path of a successful exit.
Yeah, it's very much an eyes wide open at the beginning sort of experience. I think, if you're, by the way, if you're involved in an unsuccessful exit, it's not like it's going to come as a surprise at exit time. So I think, you'll sort of have an idea either way of which way the wind is blowing.
I would
Yeah,
say,
good point, Michael. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead,
well,
Megan.
I was just gonna say, I would say too, I mean, we when we talk about exits, like there's the sale, and I think a lot of folks refer to exit IPOs as exits too, even though you're not actually exiting the business. And one thing that we often talk about with GCs is we get the question a lot as to like, oh, do I need to have taken a company public before to be a public GC? Controversial hot take, like no. I actually don't. You're gonna rely on your external counsel pretty heavily for a go public process, and the GC needs to know everything about the business itself. An IPO is another fundraising event for the company, albeit a different flavor and a higher profile one. So you're gonna need outside counsel that knows what they're doing and can really support. And on a post basis, you probably are going to need somebody that understands ongoing reporting work to help you stand that function up. But I would not be afraid of being in that seat when a company goes public if the company is otherwise supportive of that occurring. Personally, I think CFOs that have gone public are way more critical than GCs that have gone public. I know that's like an unpopular opinion, but and having done a lot of these, the key really is, the legal function needs to understand the business really well. So I guess it's soft plug for that if any of you are in that seat and have the opportunity to do it. So.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate to be in the middle market space. So the traditional path for into Portco in that space is there's a kind of smaller private equity group that originally buys it, invests money and time and builds a team and builds the business. They trade it to a new private equity company. And usually there's maybe one more round of those before it's too large to be in the private equity space, and you might look public after that. So when you're trading between private equity groups, certainly during the diligence process of selling the business, all your papers are being graded. And if you've done a good job and you have set up a well-functioning legal department, in my opinion, it wouldn't make sense to change the GC at that point, because this is the person that you can count on, that knows the business and knows how to operate the legal function successfully.
We've seen every flavor of what happens in these transition moments, and I would say if you're doing a great job, I wouldn't be worried about it. Is the short answer. I totally agree.
Very good. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. Let's move over to the audience Q&A. And again, thank you all, Logan, Michael, and Megan. I think this was a terrific, fruitful discussion. I hope the audience feels the same. I'm going to prioritize these based on the ones that got the upvote thumbs up from others. Here's one. Have any of you been with a portco with multiple sponsors without any one of them having control? If so, how did you manage juggling the different sponsor objectives? And Logan and Michael, if you haven't dealt with this firsthand, Megan, perhaps you've advised portcos that have multiple PE sponsors.
I have been in a situation with multiple PE sponsors. In fairness, one of them did, have 51%, and so they had, control of the board. But the one thing I would say was that a lot of that experience was about managing relationships and competing egos, for lack of a better way of putting it, because regardless of the relative size of their investments, these are still folks who have poured 7 or 8 figure amounts into this company and feel that they have a voice because of that, and they do. And so it's more of that sort of communication. And in that situation, I think you really need to follow the CEO's lead more than before, because it's really their job to sort of manage those competing interests and those competing relationships.
Similar experience for me. I've been in where there have been multiple private equity owners that have an investment in the business, but there was a clear majority, so you knew who kind of signed your check and who held your job in their hands. But certainly the interesting dynamic that I had was that the original PE owner of the business retained a minority interest. So they knew the business better than anybody, but they had a minority interest, so they no longer had at the board level to say so what happens. So you had this interesting dynamic of the original private equity owners knowing the ins and outs of the business, knew all of the good and bad of the business, knew the good and bad of all the management team, and then the new owners trying to get up to speed. So you're kind of managing the personalities, the differences between them, and it was just a relationship management situation more than anything else. Actually, if somebody is in the position of multiple PEs without one clear majority, I don't envy you. So
it's pretty brutal. I mean, we've done it a couple times recently. I mean, we did most recently we did KnowBe4, which was Goldman, Elephant, and KKR, and we've done GoDaddy, which was KKR, TCV, and Silver Lake, and all relatively similar ownership stakes. And I mean, the short answer is like the cycles are longer. Anytime anyone asks for one, then the other ones are all like, yep, I want the same thing. So it's like you're going to least common denominator across all of them. Like whatever one gets, they all want, whoever is feeling like asking in that given day. So it's challenging. I think, again, going all the way back to the top, the empathy and the dynamic to, the ability to navigate those dynamics, I think it does fall on the GC, and it can be tiring. I mean, it's really a heavy load, I think, especially with the equal ownership. So, I mean, maybe another, soft plug for figuring out and knowing what the ownership dynamics look like in advance of stepping into the role, so that you understand what the cap table looks like and who the ultimate, controlling party is, and it might not be one alone.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another one. My question is regarding opportunities and sustaining a career in the space. Given that the nature of the work is done with a view to an exit, how does one obtain a portco opportunity that gets you visibility to parent level management so that you can be top of mind for other opportunities in their PE holdings or the leaders networks?
Yeah, so just generally, I mean, I can speak from experience. If you're with a PE-owned business that has a successful exit, the entire management team will be flooded with headhunters and recruiters looking for folks to work on some other PE project. I think the story of, hey, I was involved in this PE portfolio company. We here are the things that we did. We reached a successful exit. Has a lot of value for the PE firms. I've never been in this situation of looking within the rest of their portfolio for another position, so I can't speak directly to that. But I can certainly tell you that the relationships I've built with the PE owners of the businesses I've been with would be one that if they ever had a position, I would feel, confident calling them and say, hey, would you consider me for the position? And I suspect you'd start way ahead of some kind of candidate that they've never met before. But it's about building that relationship and keeping up with what's out there, what they have going on. But again, I can speak to all of the executive team where I was before. Every single one of them had, opportunities presented to them out of the blue after a successful exit. I think that's a headhunting trick, a recruiting trick, is to look at successful executive team members for new opportunities.
Yeah, similarly, I have been sort of as a lawyer or GC moved within sort of this the same within portfolio companies of the same PE owner, but I have seen other members of leadership teams do it. I think that there are some PE firms out there who keep going, will go back to that well. They've had a CEO who has been successful for them and led a successful exit. They walk into a similar industry, and at the very least, we'll put that CEO on their board, if not give them a role in the company. So I think it is at the end of the day just about continuing to build that network and maintaining good relationships with those folks. And if everyone has walked away successful, as Logan said, there's no reason not to have good relationships. And just being proactive about opportunities that you hear or see about, just like any other sort of part of your network.
The only other comment I would add, I'd add one more, is most of the time when a PE firm sells the business to a new owner, there are strict non-solicitations keeping the old owner from hiring the whole management team off. So that's one that you might not have the opportunity to capitalize on, or you certainly won't get a phone call if you do, because they would have a bunch of problems there.
Another question: do either of you utilize the legal and compliance resources that sit within the fund? Or what kind of interaction, if any, do you have with the lawyers at the PE level?
Yeah, we're very fortunate at my current company that our PE sponsor maintains a whole sort of services team that works with portfolio companies, legal, accounting, human resources. They have folks who are specialists in every one of those areas who work really closely with our leadership team. I think, again, it's a matter of choosing how to deploy your resources and where you need what expertise. In matters of equity, those are somewhere where I lead, is with the PE firms, legal folks, without even thinking about it. But we've also developed a relationship, and I've only been there 6 weeks, but we've already developed a pretty good relationship where I can sort of shoot a contract by them and get their input on it, because I haven't been with the company for that long. And so it's just another voice sort of to provide some advice and some really good context for the overall business.
Yes. So in my experience, I've had a mixed bag. I've had kind of general counsel that had some operational experience, and he would weigh in on hairy issues or issues that could escalate. And then another owner that had a general counsel, but they're mostly focusing on the investment side of their firm structure and the financing side. So I've had both. Been fortunate. I mean, it adds value certainly, but one that if you're going in, you have to understand how to navigate with or without that support.
Okay. Well, we're unfortunately out of time. The hour goes by quite quickly. But thank you again, Logan, Michael, and Megan, for sharing your time and perspectives today. Really good conversation. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. Hope you felt like this was a valuable use of your time. You're going to see a short survey pop up at the end. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute to fill it out, it's a great way to give us feedback, but also a good way just to connect with us directly. If you're interested in recruiting, coaching, or advisory support, we'd love to hear from you. Hope to see you again at a future webinar. Thank you all.